1. I knew something felt off about one of my childhood friends. When I think back to my childhood, my memories are a mixture of the innocent and the eerie. Growing up in a small town where everyone knew each other, my friends and I spent our days exploring the woods and fields that surrounded our neighborhood. It was the summer of 15 years ago, the summer when we met Bernard. Michael, Zachary, and I were inseparable. Michael was the kind of kid who could make friends with anyone. He had a smile that could light up a room and a laugh that was contagious. Zachary was different. He was half friend, half bully, always teasing and testing us. But in his own way, he was loyal. The three of us had our own little world, a realm of adventure and secrets that only we knew. One afternoon, while we were playing hide and seek in the woods behind Zachary's house, we stumbled upon a boy we had never seen before. He was sitting on a fallen tree, staring at the ground. He looked about our age, maybe a year or two older, with dark, tousled hair and piercing blue eyes. "Hey, who are you?" Michael called out, always the first to extend a hand. The boy looked up, his expression unreadable. "Bernard," he said softly. "I've never seen you around before," I said, stepping closer. "Do you go to our school?" Bernard shook his head. "Just moved here." "Cool," Michael said, grinning. "You want to play with us?" Bernard nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. We welcomed him into our group, and for the rest of the day, we ran through the woods, playing games and climbing trees. Bernard was quiet, almost shy, but there was something about him that intrigued us. He moved with a strange grace, his eyes always watchful, as if he were constantly on guard. Zachary, true to form, tested Bernard's boundaries. He teased him, called him names, but Bernard never reacted the way Zachary expected. He would simply stare at Zachary, his expression calm and composed, until Zachary would eventually give up and move on. One day, Zachary brought his disposable camera, one of those old ones with the film you had to get developed. "Let's take a picture," he said, gathering us together. We huddled close, Bernard standing slightly apart, and Zachary snapped the picture. It captured a moment in time, the four of us smiling and carefree. That picture would later become a haunting reminder of the events that would unfold. As the summer wore on, Bernard's presence became a regular part of our days. He never spoke much about his family or where he lived, and whenever we asked, he would change the subject. But we didn't mind. We were just happy to have another friend. Then one day, Bernard didn't show up. We waited at our usual spot in the woods, but he never came. The next day was the same, and the day after that. Weeks turned into months, and we never saw Bernard again. We assumed he had moved away, as mysteriously as he had arrived. Life went on. The years passed, and our childhood adventures became distant memories. I joined the police force, driven by a desire to protect and serve. It was a job that required me to face the darkest aspects of humanity, but it also gave me a sense of purpose. One rainy afternoon, while cleaning out my attic, I stumbled upon a box of old photos. Among them was the picture Zachary had taken that summer. I stared at it, a flood of memories washing over me. There we were, Michael, Zachary, Bernard, and me, captured in a moment of innocent joy. A strange feeling settled in my gut. Bernard's face seemed to stare back at me, his eyes more intense than I remembered. I took the photo to work the next day, unable to shake the feeling that something was off. I showed it to a colleague who specialized in cold cases. "Hey, take a look at this," I said, handing him the photo. "Do you recognize this kid?" He examined it closely, his brow furrowing. "Give me a second." He walked over to his desk and began sifting through files. After a few minutes, he pulled out a faded document and compared it to the photo. "This is Bernard," he said, his voice hushed. "Bernard Thompson. He went missing almost 30 years ago. It's one of our oldest cold cases." A chill ran down my spine. How could Bernard have been missing for 30 years when we met him only 15 years ago? It didn't make sense. Driven by a hunch, I decided to investigate further. I returned to the woods where we used to play, the place where we had first met Bernard. The trees had grown thicker, the paths more overgrown, but it was still the same place. I walked deeper into the woods, my mind racing with possibilities. As I reached a small clearing, I noticed something half buried in the underbrush. It was a piece of fabric, tattered and weathered by time. I knelt down, my heart pounding, and began to dig. The earth was damp and heavy, but I kept at it, my hands trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. Then I saw it, a skeletal hand, fingers curled as if reaching for something. I unearthed the rest of the remains, my breath catching in my throat. There, in the shallow grave, lay the skeletal remains of a child, long forgotten and alone. I called for backup, my mind numb with shock. As we waited for the forensic team to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that Bernard was still watching me, his piercing blue eyes following my every move. The investigation confirmed what I already knew. The remains belonged to Bernard Thompson, a boy who had gone missing nearly 30 years ago. But the mystery of how he had appeared to us 15 years ago remained unsolved. I often think back to that summer, to the strange, quiet boy who appeared out of nowhere and then vanished just as suddenly. Bernard's ghost, or whatever he had been, left an indelible mark on our lives. Michael and Zachary, when I told them what I had discovered, were as bewildered as I was. We may never know the full truth of what happened, but I can't help but feel that Bernard was trying to tell us something. Perhaps his restless spirit sought companionship, a way to reach out and be remembered. Or maybe there are things in this world that we simply cannot understand, forces beyond our comprehension that shape our destinies. Whatever the case, I know one thing for certain. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, lingering in the shadows of our past, forever haunting our memories. 2. I, 25F, had an experience about 4 days ago that I haven't been able to shake. I was doghouse sitting for my boyfriend, 26M, while he was away on a backpacking trip. My boyfriend's home is in a semi-remote area at the bottom of a hill at the back of a few arches of property. He's right next to the highway, which has opposite to us a small rural neighborhood. It's both very sketchy and very safe, meaning that the community is close, but people frequently keep to themselves, and there are lots of abandoned/dilapidated homes right next to very well-kept homes. A pretty typical countryside neighborhood. So I really didn't feel unsafe to agree to watch my boyfriend's property and his dog, Hennessy. Hennessy is a 115-pound jet black American Bulldog/English Labrador mix. He's basically all muscle, and ever since my boyfriend and I began dating, he's become very protective of me and my own dog, Lottie. Lottie is a 57-pound poodle mix. I'm a dog groomer, so she's usually done up in pretty silly haircuts with bows and everything. All of this is to say that one of my dogs is very intimidating, and the other is not. Because of his strength, however, I cannot walk Hennessy and Lottie at the same time on my own, and so I usually walk Lottie alone, then go back and get Hennessy to walk him alone. We do about 30 minutes of walking each, and I like to take Hennessy after Lottie at night because I feel safer with him as it gets later. This is important because this was the case about 4 nights ago. I was about 3/4 of the way through my walk with Lottie when I got this really weird feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I looked around to see that about 30 feet or so back, there was a tall man in a hoodie standing next to an older, run-down home. I instantly thought the hoodie was weird. I live in Northern California, and it's early August. It doesn't get colder than 87 degrees in the evening, especially when the sun was still setting like it was at the time. I forced myself to brush it off as I tend to be fairly paranoid due to my years of reading Let's Not Meet stories. As I kept walking, the sun kept setting and the streets began to slowly get darker. I would glance back from time to time and notice that the man was keeping pace with me, not breaking that 30-odd foot distance. If I turned a corner, so did he. If I sped up, so did he. Finally, we reached the highway and I crossed right before a car came speeding past, hoping that if the guy was following me, this would put some distance between him and myself, which it did, but that didn't stop him from continuing to follow me. I walked as fast as I could to the house, not wanting to turn around, but now being able to hear his footsteps on the gravel. At this point, Lottie had noticed him too and started to bark and growl. I forced her to keep moving and thankfully made it back inside the house, slamming and locking the door, hoping that that was the end of it. It was not. Moments after I'd shut and locked the door, I felt someone trying to open it. The dogs heard this too and started barking because they always do when someone is at the door. There's no peephole on my door, but I can talk to whoever is on the other side. It's a pretty thin door. So I yelled out and asked who was there. Through the barking, I could hear a man's voice. "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" For some reason, the way he said it was so creepy. It was like there was nothing behind it, kind of like he'd rehearsed the line or decided to say it beforehand. I yelled back, "No," and asked him to, "Please go away." He paused for another second and then again said, "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" He starts trying the door handle again, this time pushing up against the door. By this point, Hennessy can tell something is wrong, and so can Lottie. The hair on the back of Hennessy's neck is standing up, and he's mashing his teeth while growling. At that moment, I don't know what possessed me, but I threw Lottie into the bathroom behind me and grabbed Hennessy by the collar, keeping him close to the door with me. He's still barking and going crazy. I hear the man repeat that he wants to meet my dog, and I yelled out, "Leave!" He paused and then slammed into my door. I say the door move, and at that moment, I unlocked the door and opened it just wide enough that Hennessy could get about halfway out. He's going bonkers at this point. My hand is starting to hurt from holding him back. I can hear his teeth clacking as he ferociously chomps toward the man. Well, this dude was not expecting Hennessy. He stumbled back, almost falling over, and cursed as he scrambled to stay off the ground. He didn't even look at me, and instead booked it up the hill as fast as he could and out of sight. I managed to pull Hennessy back in and called the cops to tell them what had happened. I never got a good look at the guy, and they basically told me there wasn't anything I could really do, but they did take my statement and told me they'd contact me if anything ever came of it. I am so thankful for Hennessy. After all of that, I snuggled up with him and Lottie that night and cried because it had all hit me how terrifying that was. I literally went out the next day and bought him the biggest bone I could find from a pet store nearly an hour away because he'd earned it. I also got Lottie something too, as Hillel. I don't know why this creep didn't get the hint when I had two dogs barking inside, but my assumption is that he didn't really realize he was hearing two barks, or assumed that if I had two dogs, they were both like my puffy poodle. That is to say, he wasn't afraid. I'm so thankful the guy didn't have a firearm, and looking back now, I probably should have just called the cops and kept my door closed. But I hope that maybe because he saw Hennessy, he'll know not to come back and mess with us, because if he does, I'll let my big sweet boy rip his arm off. 3. One of my earliest memories, dating back to when I was around 3 or 4 years old, is particularly vivid. I was wandering alone toward the barn of my parents' property. The barn was located near a dense forest that covered 6 of the 8 acres of land we owned. As I was walking, I suddenly heard a scraping sound. Curious, I looked over at the edge of the woods and saw 3 figures in white hooded robes, wearing golden masks, staring directly at me. One of them beckoned me to come closer. Mesmerized, I began to walk towards them. Just then, my mother called out to me from the porch, but I ignored her voice and continued towards the mysterious figures. It wasn't until my father rushed out and scooped me up that I snapped out of it. As he carried me back inside, I glanced over my shoulder, and the figures had vanished. A few weeks later, I heard that a little girl had gone missing in the area and was never found. To this day, the thought of what could have happened if my father hadn't been there chills me to the bone. Edit. If you don't believe me, please don't comment. No, I never discussed this with my parents. I assume those figures were part of a cult because no ordinary person would dress like that. And if my dad saw them, I have no idea what he might have thought. 5. I'll try to be brief, but I have 4 haunted house experiences. I moved around quite a bit as a kid to my dad's job. We moved to Wausau, Wisconsin for 6 months when I was in 3rd grade in 1970. I kept seeing things move and hearing voices in my room. My parents chalked it up to an overactive imagination and no more night gallery for you. It was 30 years later when my mom told me someone died in my room. 2. We moved back to Appleton and lived at that home about 6 months. My parents had problems with the landlady. It was weird when I moved back as I went to the same school I was attending at Sacred Heart. I thought people traded homes when they moved. It was like a time warp when I went to the same Mrs. Hoffman's class. We moved across town to 1213 East Francis Street in 1972. We lasted a year there as it was a small ranch house with 3 bedrooms, and my mom, dad, 2 sisters, and new baby brother outgrew it. My sister Amy talked about a man being in the basement, and we could hear someone walking up the stairs at night. I always got the heebie-jeebies and friends too when playing in the basement. My parents told us years later someone committed suicide in the basement. Now, 3. We moved down the block to 1301 E. Francis in 1973. My parents' room is downstairs. Our 3 bedrooms are upstairs. My brother's room is always colder, and I keep having bad dreams about a boy who lived in the attic in my bedroom closet. I also felt being watched playing with my chemistry set in my dad's workshop. Lights flickered always. We kids would race downstairs to the pantry to fetch some canned goods or something out of the deep freeze and race up like we were being chased. Our parents pooh-poohed this, even though cupboard doors would slam and no one was in the kitchen. Stuff would appear or move. One time, the closet door in my sister's room opened and slammed shut. My other sister, Sarah, said she saw a little girl with red eyes often by her bed in the middle of the night and by the downstairs closet. My brother confirmed the same thing, that he felt someone sit on his bed and saw the same girl with red eyes. We were there till 1978. 4. I lived with 2 guys in a condo in Reno in the 2000s. I told them from the get-go something was off, but my roomies just told me to shut the hell up. My silky terrier Ziggy would often be standing on my bed whimpering, "I don't understand," growl in the middle of the night, and we all heard footsteps doing up by and down the stairs. I was a stage hypnotist, and one roomie, John, wanted free tickets to impress some women for my show. I wondered what the heck as I saw John non-stop texting through the entire show. After the show, he says I have to go home. Dominic is having a meltdown. Seems Dominic heard something in my room, and my dog Ziggy was growling at my closet, and Dominic demanded the spirit show itself and heard a crash. He snapped a pretty clear picture, which we posted on the internet. Dominic challenged the ghost because that's what they did on TV. Shit got wild, and we had 3 Ghostbusters tell us the same story. They told Dominic not to say anything as they wanted to experience it themselves. We left for 2 hours and came back to EVPs and orbs on the camera. They said the young boy and girl liked my dog, but there was also a dark man. We had Terry Landry from the news come out with her Ghost Hunters team and said the same thing. 5. Not my house, but a friend's. I was doing the long-distance thing with a woman from Pittsburgh, and she was psychic. We had dinner at my friends Cheryl and Dave's. After dinner, the dogs start barking, and the parrot is squawking. Cheryl said it's our ghosts. We investigate and get some cool EVPs and get several pics with orbs flying about. We get back home, and the woman and I get the feeling someone just walked over our graves. I have only had that feeling once before. Bonnie said the ghost traveled with us home and immediately saged my house. That's all for today's stories. If you have any stories of your own, let me know in the comments and I'll message you. I look forward to hearing your story. Have a good night or a good day, everyone. For more stories, please subscribe to my channel. Until next time.